Well, the head of the Janet McElady, the head of the Dade County School Board.
Yeah.
And she wanted to know if we wanted to do a television series on our website, which I said yes, and then I told her about what we're doing. But this is the man that I want people to see, Albert P. Blaustein, Professor Emeritus at Rutgers University. He came all the way down from Camden, New Jersey, because he'd seen our website, and he totally agreed.
Hold it up, I can't see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he agreed totally that lawyers do not belong in public office. It's a conflict of interest. And he was the person sent by the American government to Russia at the time of the Gorbachev revolution over there, set up the new Russian Constitution and make sure that people's civil rights and human rights were protected in the new Russian Constitution, and their constitutional rights are also protected. So he was there, and he'd worked in the Constitution of 23 different countries around the world, and it was called Mr. Constitution.
Yeah, he was one of the most well-versed men in the...
in the world. He was going to be, he was destined, if they ever overthrew Castro in Cuba, he was destined to go down to Cuba to make sure that people's civil rights and human rights were protected in the new Cuban Constitution. Yeah, and he was going to be sent to the American government.
And so he took up the issue very adamantly.
Oh, definitely. To make sure that people's human rights and civil rights are protected in every constitution.
All right, and that the separation of powers was key in all of this.
Exactly. And if other countries wanted to, okay.
Well, I mean, talk more about it.
Okay. Well, the main thing, I'm hoping to get people to understand that there are people out there that want to do something to change the Constitution of the United States to make sure that people's civil rights and human rights are protected every day of your life. And one person that I hope people will remember is Albert P. Blaustein, Professor Emeritus at Rutgers University. He's worked in the Constitution of 23 different countries around the world, again, to make one main stipulation that people's human rights and civil rights are protected in every constitution. And again, he was destined to go to Cuba, and when they figured they're going to overthrow Castro at some point, and he was destined by the American government to go down there and make sure that everything was done properly. And again, people's civil rights and human rights were protected in Cuba, along with other countries that he's worked on around the world.
Well, perhaps he should have worried more about the United States, right?
Well, he should have worried more about the United States, but when Gorbachev had the revolution down in Russia, the Russian government called him over there to make sure that in the new Russian Constitution that people's civil rights and human rights are protected in the Russian Constitution. So he was called Mr. Constitution, and he spent quite a time over there in Russia to make sure that this happened, and make sure that again, people's civil rights and human rights are protected in the new Russian Constitution.
But I guess he didn't have very much, didn't make very much ground here in the United States.
Well, exactly. That's what the problem is. That people.
Let's keep the conversation to the United States here. Here we have one of the highest caliber people in the world on this issue of separation of powers. I'm sure that he had a standing law degree dealing with
constitutional law. He was a top constitutional law professor at Rutgers University in Camden, New Jersey, and he had worked there for several years. And, and his son is also a professor.
So one of the top guys, and he says, separation of powers,
separation of powers to make sure that people's civil rights and human rights are protected in every constitution. And they used to call him Mr. Constitution because he's worked in the Constitution of 23 different countries around the world, and he was on loan from the American government.
What's the problem with the fact that you would have the government, three branches of the government in the same hands, which is basically the lawyers?
Exactly.
By the way, you have the judiciary, you have the legislative, and you have the executive, but then you have this bar association, which acts like a fourth branch of government, doesn't it? Or another branch of government that lobbies and doesn't have to wear lobby ID when they go lobbying at Congress or at the respective state legislatures. So what do you have to say about all of that?
This is the main craw in everyone's throat here in Florida, and it's all over the country. Lawyers do not belong in all three branches of government because they're in violation of the separation of powers doctrine, which is the cornerstone of every republic. And the fact that they're in all three branches of government already nullifies the very cornerstone, which is separation of powers.
And James Madison,
one of our founding fathers, who was not a lawyer, by the way, stipulated very plainly, we must never let the government go into the same hand's control, because you will have tyranny. And that's exactly what we have in America today. And our wonderful constitutional law professors refuse to get involved in this little argument, because most of these law professors are molded to the bar associations in the individual states, and they would be blackballed by the system if they ever talked about getting lawyers out of public office, because they took over the whole judicial branch of government, and we've lost all common sense in the judicial branch of government. And again, this whole thing is such a scam that people don't realize that if we don't soon turn this thing around, this country will be totally bankrupt. I mean, right now, we're close to $16 trillion in debt that we owe the governments around the world. We're the highest debtor nation in the world. And again, our bar associations are sit there getting filthy rich, and the countries are going broke. And they get more and more power every day. And just because they think as long as it's legal sense, it's got to be good, doesn't necessarily mean it's common sense. And so there's a wonderful book written out there, The Death of Common Sense in America, by a person by the name of Philip K. Howard, who is a lawyer, by the way. And he points out that the lawyers have taken over all three branches of government. There's no more checks and balances. There's no more separation of powers. And again, the book is called The Death of Common Sense in America. And he's just written a
When did that come out?
That came out about 10 years ago. And he's sponsored by the Manhattan Institute, which is a think tank in New York. And they also work for the United States Chamber of Commerce. And they're pointing out how all of these major corporations, are being taken over and by foreign influences, and that's a big problem. Right now, China.
Well, the corporations are taking over America.
Well,
the corporations,
but a lot of the corporations are.
Well, hold it. More of a person than we as citizens are persons somehow, because they have the money. And they can give unlimited funds as a result of that United versus, do you know the name of that full case that the Supreme Court ruled recently on? That the corporations can give unlimited funds because they are persons, and the persons of the corporation had their constitutional rights violated because they can't give as much money as they wish they could give. And now they can give as much as they like. So how does that influence our politics? And make it so our sovereign citizens have no say in their own government.
Well, there's an old expression here that says we have the best politicians that money can buy. And that's exactly where we stand in America. We have the politicians are totally indebted to all of our major corporations, and they give them big funds, big donations. And in Washington today, we have, thousands and thousands of lobbyists, highly paid lobbyists, who walk into the offices of these politicians. They make very large donations, and they've already bought a politician. And when they, get finished at the end of the day, it's like a total scam, because they've already bought all the politicians to vote a certain bill a certain way. I remember Newt Gingrich. Because
they give so much campaign money, and the politician feels compelled to honor the wishes of the corporation.
Exactly. And this Jack Abramoff, one of probably the wildest stories that went on in Washington recently.
Right, that he got out of jail now.
Right, and he said he believes the whole system is illegal because
he fessed up, right? Yeah, he fessed up. Okay, and he said what?
He said basically, we have bought up all these different corporations, and these corporations are given certain benefits, and he said we have the best politicians that money can buy, and that's where we're at today. And these politicians are bought up every single day in Washington, and they're selling out to whatever gives them the most money.
So what happened when you, as a citizen, went to some of these congressmen, or perhaps at the Florida state legislative level, when you went to the Florida state legislature? Did you get any kind of representation?
Not really. I mean, we want legal reform, but they want something on a package that they'll be able to follow through. But again, it's got to be very easy on the lawyers, because the lawyers are the main contributors. and they know that they're bought and paid for every day by lawyers. And one of the groups that's doing a lot of under the cover work is the Florida Bar. In Florida, we call them the Florida Barbarians, because they're paying off the legislatures. They're making deals on the side here, and deals on the side there, and it's to their advantage and it's to the disadvantage of the public. So again, like you say, they're in the legislature. They have lawyer legislators in the state of Florida making the laws. You got lawyer judges adjudicating the laws, and then you got lawyer prosecutors enforcing the laws. And again, these people are making large donations to the legislators, and money talks, and I guess BS walks.
But you brought up that the Florida State Constitution said what about the separation of powers?
We must have 3 separate branches of government, and under Article 2, Section 3 of the Florida State Constitution says very plainly, you cannot be a member of 2 parts of government at the same time. Now that's written in stone. You cannot change it. I mean, separation of powers, it says exactly specifics of it, and there's no leniency either way. You've got to have it. If you don't follow it, then we're just nullifying the Constitution itself.
Now the lawyers say you are the scum. The lawyers say that you you don't know law. They are the professionals. They know the law. Okay, and yet you bring out the fact that they're violating the Florida Constitution. Okay, and they just ignore it. Well, and then you had that confrontation with the Attorney General of Florida.
Bob Butterworth, and he told us that he wouldn't let us even shine his shoes. That he was that good a person, and that we're scum. And that's the basic problem. And the funniest thing is that Bob Butterworth's been involved in all kinds of scandals in the state of Florida, and things that have gone on. His law partner, I think, went to jail. This goes on and on and on, and it's just a terrible thing that's taking place here in Florida. That people just don't trust the politicians at all.
But why didn't he answer on the merits of your argument? Instead, brings up this issue that I would have you shine my shoes.
Exactly.
Why not? When you confronted him with a petition that had some reasoning, legalese and reasoning, why he couldn't respond to the legal issues and had to answer back in such a way that was demeaning, had nothing to do with the legal issues.
Well, that's the type of person he is, and I wonder why.
But the lawyers say they're the professionals. The government should be in their hands because they're the professionals.
Well, the thing is, it's no wonder why Bob Butterworth, and I feel bad about this, but it happened the day he got elected as Attorney General in the state of Florida. His wife, who is a lawyer, shot and killed his son, his only son, and shot and killed herself to give the public a message that something's wrong with the system. And this is where the rubber meets the road. It's a sad situation. But here's our Attorney General who gets elected as Attorney General for the state of Florida, and then his wife, as her payback for him, or whatever it was, shoots and kills his only son and kills herself.
Okay, let's. So basically, you got involved with all of this because at one time in your life, about 25 years ago, you went through a divorce.
30 years ago. But
30 years ago, and you went through a divorce.
Yeah, it's one of the saddest.
So what was the trigger to say, "Hey, enough is enough"? What was the trigger?
Well, when I realized that these lawyers that
we had a conversation with a certain lawyer. He called you up and said what?
Right. He said, "Well, you better knock it off, and you better settle down, or we're going to take you to the cleaners."
But did he say something like, "Where's the money? You're short your money."
You better put money up front here, because you're basically
you're short this month, and you better come up with the money. And it's
just like a demand that like they're talking. They figure that everybody other than who they are, they talk to them like slime. In other words, you're slime, and you better come up with it right away because we need money.
And what was your position at that time?
My position at that time was I was financially broke. I just bought another property, and I was just trying to get on my feet to get this property going on the right direction, and my money was destined to go in that area. And of course, he just tell me, sell it and pay us money. Forget we're the only important ones in this deal. You're nothing. And again, they just treat you like slime.
So you got pissed and started doing this campaign of delivering.
Oh, definitely. I started on the courthouse steps. I started putting out flyers. divorce lawyers are family butchers. And then later on, before the judge, I realized he treated you like slime. So divorce judges are family executioners. And this is the Dade County Family Slaughterhouse. And I continued to pick it up in front of there. I put flyers showing the losses. You cannot be a member of the Bar Association and be a legislator at the same time. It's against the law, and they're above this. They treated like everybody else that's not a lawyer is just like slime. And this goes on and on every day. I've had 3 of my friends, 3 decent, productive fathers, go through these stupid divorces in the Dade County courthouse steps, and they got treated like slime, and they ended up committing suicide.
Okay, one of them was a black man.
Billy King. Billy King was a...
Tell us, just relax, and tell us the story of Billy King.
Billy King was a young black gentleman. He was the psalmist religion. He'd married his childhood sweetheart, and he was working in the bedding factory. Him and his father, they were a minority. They were black people, and there was probably the only bedding factory up in Riviera Beach. And he and his father worked together, and they kept on building beds, and they'd put them on their pickup truck and take the beds and sell them to different stores in the black community, and they seemed to make just a fair living, but they were competitive with their prices, and they were able to get a certain amount of business. And the next thing you know, his wife, she was a young gal. Billy was working a lot of overtime in the bedding factory because there was just him and his dad building the beds, and they got a big order for beds. And of course they had to work, some late at night sometimes. So unfortunately, his wife saw this young kid next door, and she started having a relationship with him. And Billy was coming home at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning from the bedding factory.
Working and building up this business for how many years?
Right, for several years. I mean, at least 15 years.
15 years.
And him, all of a sudden, when his wife...
Okay, so now his wife decides to divorce him. Okay?
Right.
And the lawyers came in.
Right. Well, they had a big law firm in Miami Beach.
Okay, we'll take a little break. Go ahead.
Okay.
So now we got Billy King.
Yeah,
and,
Billy King.
So basically, now they've really stripped him of anything for him to live off of, and he has to pay heftily for child support and alimony, right?
Exactly.
And he has to pay these lawyer fees. So he's living where at this point?
He's living sleeping in the back of one of the empty trucks.
Because he can't afford anything for himself.
Right.
So basically the courts made a ruling. They don't give a crap about him. Okay, he has no place to live. They don't leave him any money for him.
Exactly.
Okay, so now the lawyers were evil-eyeing his business. So what happened?
Well, they went ahead and took over his business.
How did they do that? How did they do that?
They hired a management company to take over the business because his father was sick and actually ready to die.
Well, what gave them authority to do that?
Well, because he was getting so far behind and everything is like
wasn't that the lawyer bills amounted?
$1,000.
Or it wasn't the lawyer bills.
It was the thousands of dollars that he owed attorney fees.
So that's how they took the business.
Well, sure. And then they jumped all over them, and next thing you know, the court receiver was appointed, and they became part of the management company. And Billy ended up sleeping in the back of one of the.
So he's a slave to the lawyers now. So he basically, what happened here? And tell me if I'm wrong. Okay, he built the business up with his dad for 15 years.
Right.
Worked really hard, late nights, so there could be money. And his wife, who didn't work and help out at all, she's at home having affairs with these young guys next door.
Exactly.
Okay? So anyway, she decides to divorce his ass, and she gets this very good lawyer. And now the lawyers do how much paperwork? Let's say maybe a week, not even, a few days of paperwork, and they've amounted enough lawyer bills to take his 15-year effort of building up a building. Did I get it right?
Right on target. Right on target. He got so disillusioned that he was just like a robot, just trying to do this, trying to do that, and he realized he was getting no place because they no longer owned the business. They were in bills up to their ears. They couldn't afford to do anything right, and the problem is he used to depend on me for some.
Okay, so basically, when he was down and out, you were out there. You were on the radio at that point.
Oh, yeah, I'd been on the radio several times up in West Palm Beach and in Riviera Beach, up in the Fort Lauderdale area, and explaining how corrupt the system was. And
he was a listener.
And he was definitely a listener.
Okay, so then what?
Well, at one point, of course, he's a black person. I introduced him to
So he called you, said, I heard you on the radio, right?
Oh, yes. No, and I brought him down to meet our Chief Justice, Leander Shaw, who's also a black person. And Leander Shaw was very nice with him, but he said, listen, he said, I got to admit that the whole family law system is crooked and corrupt. He said, I've been through my own divorce, and I realized, you know, how corrupt it really is, but he said, there's nothing I can do about it. You know, being a Chief Justice, and that they're under the sponsorship and at the behest of the Florida Bar, and they just they have to do things a certain way, or the bar will, you know, give them a rough time.
Come on, who wants who? I mean, the Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court.
They don't care.
Is owned by the bar. I mean, this is interesting. Come on.
It is exactly the way it goes. The people are so upset in the state of Florida, they call them the Florida barbarians, because they don't treat any people like human beings. They treat them like slime, and they send a nice letter on to this person, a nice letter on to that person, to tell them to keep up the good work. They like this and like that, but it's all bull crap.
Okay, so you're helping out Billy Kane, right, and he tells you that he's sleeping in the back of his truck. So right, what do you do? Well,
I told him, I said, you can come down every weekend. I have a motel, and usually on the weekends it's very light on truck drivers that stay there. And I said, you can come down and have a complimentary room and stay for a couple of days, and we'll have our meals together in my office, and so you'll have a free weekend. You come down because it's, you know, I want to try to introduce you to some people in Miami that maybe can be influential and help.
Well, give them a place to sleep.
Yeah,
and have a decent meal.
Exactly.
All right, and so you're just a pretty amazing guy. But I know you're modest, and but all right. So you brought him down, and so now he's almost like he looks forward to that weekend.
Oh yes,
where he can come down, not sleep in his truck, have a real
I used
room.
to take him to meetings in the black community and introduce him to different people that were going through.
You gave him hope.
Yeah, give him a home to stay in the weekends.
Hope.
Oh, yeah, definitely give him hope to give him that maybe we can do something, work together, and turn around this whole catastrophe he's going through. And I brought him, believe it or not, I was kind of a beacon of hope for him, and he called the motel one Friday morning, and just shortly before that, our wonderful Hialeah Police Department came and arrested me, threw me in jail, recalled my properties, because they said I was allowing drug dealers on my property. And the funniest thing is I'm the only motel probably in the country that had signs on my fence that says no drugs or prostitutes allowed in this property. I used to deal mainly with just truck drivers, and I didn't want any of the problems on the street people, so I just considered that they were persona non grata as far as I was concerned, and that's why I put the signs on the fence.
And you put many complaints in also. How many complaints did you
I called the police department 386 times in 1 year. So when I got arrested and thrown in jail.
What year?
This is November 2nd, 1990. And believe it or not, the police chief, you know, who was a crook, and his two sons were arrested, you know, for stealing cars and various other misdemeanors. And all of a sudden,
set you up.
They tried to set me up and try to steal the motel from me.
So how did they do it? They brought the mayor down in the news to have you on television getting apprehended. Is that correct?
Exactly.
It's saying that you were doing what? Dealing drugs?
Well, I was allowing drug dealers on my property, but I had signs on my fence all around this property. No drugs or prostitutes allowed on this property.
Well, I thought they were accusing you directly of dealing the drugs.
Well, that's what they tried to do. They tried to do anything they can. They were desperate. Right. And finally, when I got thrown in jail and all my property stolen from me, everything I worked for all my life, it's all stolen. And then people started to complain about the police chief, and even the mayor called him nothing but a liar. And
well, when it broke out, that came later after you got out of this mess. Then the mayor.
No, even at the time they called him on television. He was a liar.
Well, why did they help him out?
Well,
that day when you know,
when they realized that this whole thing was a phony scam to begin with, that several of the police officers were actually taking kickbacks from the drug dealers and the drug warehouse to protect the drug warehouses, and that's when all these policemen wound up in all the different problems with the drug dealers. Then they realized that when I'm standing there telling the truth, to keep off my property, I used to have just mainly truck drivers and student pilots stay in my building. I didn't want these drug dealers around there. That's why they come to the door, and I say, I'm sorry, I don't have room for you. You know, so that's basically what it comes down to. But like I say, the way they twisted the thing up, they make it sound like I'm looking for these people for business. And I'm probably the only motel in the world that has signs on my fences, no drugs or prostitutes allowed on this property.
Okay.
So this is the
So
sad
the whole
part.
thing was a setup. So how did you actually get out of this mess?
Well, thank heavens I knew the Chief Justice, and I called him the next morning after I got out of jail.
He was a former Chief Justice, right?
Yeah, this guy was the former Chief Justice, and he told me to come to Tallahassee and come to his office, and I had to meet certain people in Tallahassee and tell them my story, how I took petitions up to get drug dealers off our properties and get better police protection. The people that had gone to the Department of Law Enforcement, they called me in their office and they told me that our police chief was corrupt and that he wasn't, any benefit to anybody. And sure enough, then when the different people in the press came forward and different state senators, I remember Roberto Casas. I met him on the street one day. His car broke down, and I gave him a tow with my van, and he said, our police chief is the worst piece of crap we've ever had for a police chief when he hires his sons, who admitted as teenagers they were stealing cars off the streets and taking them down to Dodge Island to be sent to the Dominican Republic and selling for $1,000 a piece. So that made me stop and think. I mean, and other people came to me and told me the same thing. They said our police chief is totally corrupt. And then one of the sons of the police chief, he got arrested because
I'm saying the mayor wasn't on to this, and the press wasn't on to this.
They were all
but at the time of which they all got together and set you up.
Their silence was bought. They were certain people paid them to buy their silence because they wanted to go through the scam of stealing a motel because I'm an angle, and they thought that I was expendable, so they would, just do this and scare the hell out of me. And the sad part about it is that to the day I die, I have that my little daughter at the time was like 4 years old, and they snatched her out of my arms, and basically ordered them to throw the child in HRS. And like I say, the whole thing was such a scam. Like I say, to the day I die, I will never forget or forgive what a bunch of those crooks did. And like when the police chief put his hand on my face and said, "This will teach you to keep your big effing mouth shut." And I told him, I said, "I'll keep my mouth open. This is United States of America. I don't come from a communist country like you come from Cuba, which you caused your communism down with all your civil rights and human rights violation on the Cuban people." So I said, that's what brought communism to your country, and you don't want to bring the same thing to this country because the people throw your ass back to where you belong.
So you continue on with your activism.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, and one of the culminating points was this event that happened in Disney. What year?
Disney World. American Bar Association had a meeting in Disney World, and I was asked. I don't remember the exact year, but I was brought to Disney World with our group, and I met Elie Wiesel. She was head of Human Rights International, and he was talking about the abuses of people in Nazi Germany and European countries, and he likened to some of the things that are happening in this country today. But
he also had a warning about the Nazis, right?
Oh yes,
I mean that's his main
shtick was the fact that yes, and they had Bob Eaton, who was the chairman of the board of Chrysler Motor Corporation. He had a warning out to the American Bar Association. He said, with all this litigation that you're causing American companies, you're just causing Japanese and German and other countries to come over to this country and do manufacturing and do more business than the American companies are supposed to be doing.
Okay, so they were doing their own little bomb shelling to soften the battlefield, okay? But really, you went up there in an attempt to crash the thing, right?
Well, the main thing
you came armed with pamphlets.
Okay.
Okay, and in the spirit of how you told me this story the other night, what exactly happened? So
the basic thing in the family law system,
yeah,
the number of families have been destroyed by corrupt lawyers and judges. I went to the family law system checkpoint in the auditorium, and there were 600 people in that auditorium, and I put our flyers dispasing American family law is disorganized justice. And I put the material out showing the exact cases that were taking place, and I left three of my friends in that auditorium to see what was happening, and I went over to the main auditorium of the American Bar Association, and Mr. Bob Eaton and Ali Wazell, they were over there speaking to the American Bar, and while I'm over there with this other gal, Julie Gambino, we put material all around the auditorium and all the different conference halls, showing the injustice of the American Bar Association.
That's before the seats were really inhabited, or?
Exactly. Well, some of them seats were inhabited partially, and other people I met in the hallway and passed the material, and then all of a sudden,
just before the thing really got off on its major start. But so basically, what happened? The conference kind of had a surprise then.
Well, all of a sudden, I couldn't believe it, but there were two big, looked like football players, come up in their gold jackets, and they come up and they said, "Are you passing this material out?" And of course, I examined what they'd been passing out, and I said, "This could be it." I said, "It's been okayed by the our Americans for Justice organization, and several lawyers that read it, and they agreed with it."
Sit back, relax.
So I felt very strongly that this material should be passed out, and I passed it out all over the whole auditorium, and in the hallways and the passageways, and I gave all the material out. And
so basically,
two big football players came up and they said, "Are you passing this material out?" Examine the material. I said, "I think we might be passing out." And they said, "Well, get out of the, get off Disney World right away." And there were 6 Orlando police officers at the main gate, at the main door of the hotel, and they escorted us off the property.
Okay, but basically, you had an effect upon.
Oh, we definitely had a big effect. I mean, there was
so much of an effect that they canceled.
Oh, the rest
the
of the meetings. They canceled the rest of the
bringing
meetings.
that very important point.
They canceled the whole family law system. They canceled that whole thing, and I put enough material around to
There
make
was
it.
a big banner up. We the Bar Association
want to make a better system.
Wants to make a better system, and the whole thing was smoke and mirrors. And you showed them, the character that they really did function in, and they just basically couldn't deny it, and it just turned into a big bad press scenario for them.
Exactly.
And they shut it down. And I mean, they had spent an enormous amount of money setting this up, and with just efforts of how many people, 3 or 4 people. You, by passing out pamphlets and speaking the truth, you shut the whole thing down. Is that what happened?
But there was about 10 of us inside the whole thing, putting our materials all over the conference, and they realized that we basically had done something to sabotage the whole conference, and it was sad because they don't want to hear the truth. We've done the same thing up in New York. We tried to meet with them up in New York. They didn't want to listen to what we're talking about. They didn't want us in the auditoriums over there at both the Sheraton and the Hilton hotels in New York City. And they don't want to hear the truth. I mean, that's the bottom line, is they just want to know how much money they're going to be able to steal from the public and get away with it. And that's the bottom line. They're not worried about truth and justice or anything else like that. They're just worried about with the big dollars that they can sock from the public and steal from the public. And when they put themselves in all 3 branches of government, they're basically destroying the government. And people don't. That's why people don't go out and vote today. You ask people on the street, you go out and vote, hell knows. You ask them why they don't vote, and they said, well, it's like replacing Al Capone with Bugsy Malone. Another one set of crooks with another set of crooks. And people just don't believe in the system. They've had elections down here in Miami. In some precincts, only 15 or 20% of the people go out and vote. I mean, that's close to 80-85% of the people stay home. And they've taken surveys and they've asked them, why don't you go out and vote? And that's, again, their answer is, it's based on the lines of it's like replacing Al Capone with Bugsy Malone. And people don't want to believe in the system, but they don't have to. In other words, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, eats like a duck, sleeps like a duck, it's not a platypus, it's a duck. And that's exactly where we're at today. And that's why these politicians have to put out so many signs and all kinds of publicity, go out and vote, we'll give you a free ride to the polls, we have a van, we have a bus, we have cars, we'll take you to the poll. I mean, they're that desperate because people just don't believe in the system. And unless they have reason to believe in it, it's fine, but they don't have reason to believe in it. Nothing changes.
Yeah, but what would work as the people did come together in mass and occupied the courts.
It'd be an excellent idea, but the thing is, these people are brutal. These people are brutal. If they get your name and address, there are certain crooked politicians who are involved with certain crooked police and different agencies, and they'll harass you. And they'll find out the leader of this thing, and they will set him up, plant drugs in his car, or do whatever they can, try to get rid of you. And that's the problem that people have to understand. And I say one thing and one thing only: education, education, education. Understand, read the Federalist Papers. Go and get a copy. Mary Webster, the Webster Dictionary family, put out a beautiful book. It's called The Federalist Papers in Modern Language by Mary Webster of the Webster Dictionary family. She put the books out. It's been she got a congratulations from United States Justice Clarence Thomas, United States Senator Charles Grassley from the state of Iowa, John Kasich, who was Assistant Speaker of the House, and now he's the governor of the state of Ohio. I mean, she got 3 beautiful letters from these people congratulating you on the book. And the real thing is the book tells you about separation of powers and checks and balances, which we don't have in our government today. Today we got lawyer legislators making the laws, then we got lawyer judges adjudicating the laws, and then we got lawyer prosecutors enforcing the laws. Did not Lord Acton, the English nobleman, said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We have a corrupt form of government. That's why people don't go out and vote. There's certain areas in elections that take place around the states of Florida here, in the state of Florida, and only 10 to 15% of the people ever go out and vote. I mean, that means like 80 to 85% of the people stay home, and they've taken surveys, gone around and asked people, why don't you go out and vote? And their answer is it's like replacing Al Capone with Bugs and Malone. There's one set of crooks and another set of crooks.
Okay. So basically, that's from the angle of voting lawyers out of the legislature. What about from the side of the judiciary, that somehow the rules can change where we take away judicial immunity?
It's the whole judicial...
If suddenly judges had no judicial immunity.
Well, that's
all right.
Hard
they've given themselves judicial immunity.
Exactly. In other words,
Bradley versus Fisher, on a very shaky reasoning. Bradley versus Fisher, by the way, was about a judge saying to a girl, "You're stupid. You're stupid, and your whole family is stupid. Therefore, I order that your ovaries be cut out."
Right.
And years later, when she had her family, she sued the judge.
Sure.
And the decision was that a judge has absolute immunity even for malicious acts.
Yeah.
So if you held a microphone, went out into the streets and held a microphone to the common citizen and ask that person on the street, should a judge have immunity even for malicious acts, what do you think the response would be from the person in the street answering that microphone? Yes, what percentage would say yes, and what percentage would say no?
I'd say as far as the judge having immunity, probably 90% of the people said he shouldn't have immunity.
90? I would think it's 99, but myself.
Maybe 99.
I mean, who would ever say, no, a judge shouldn't have
There's a certain number of people that are intimidated, and they think if they say the wrong thing, they're going to go to jail, or somebody's going to pick them up, or the FBI is going to come and visit them, for subversion. There's a certain number of people that they're scared out of their mind, and they won't say anything that's going to offend anybody, because they figure the FBI or some agency is going to come to the door and and make a visit.
So now you bring up the fear factor.
Fear factor is tremendous.
You've been fearless all these years.
I've been fearless.
Even after you've been arrested and jailed.
Yeah, and my property stolen.
And your property stolen. So after all that, you still remain fearless. You're on the camera now.
Yeah, okay, but I'm just saying that people, all I'm asking people to do, if you want to keep this country going in the right direction, they say an educated consumer is your best customer, and if you have a chance to get Mary Webster's Federalist Papers in Modern Language by Mary Webster, the Webster Dictionary family, you can get it on Amazon.net and the internet. and get the book, read it, take that book to the library, get 3 people to go to the library, the book, and the library has to buy the book, and then you go to the curriculum
How
department.
about law schools?
Law schools, yeah, that's where they should go, but they'll be the biggest ones to fight it. They don't want to. They don't want to get educated properly. They want to go listen to the professors who can brainwash them and tell them that they're the greatest people in the world. They got a superior position in the government, and that they're going to have things and they're going to make big money if they do things a certain way. You know, and keep the club closed. You know, keep the doors closed. We don't want to have any strangers inside here, so they can, you know, take our wonderful judicial system apart. And the more people they put in jail, the more cases they make, the more arrests they do, the more cases they make, and it really doesn't necessarily make it a better country. It makes the lawyers rich, but that's all that matters to them. They're not worried about drug dealers getting back in the streets.
But now you've ridden. Let's say the day comes when there's no more judicial immunity, and a couple of these judges now have their boats taken, now have their properties clawed back, now have their stocks eliminated, now are left penniless because of their wrongful procedural actions.
Right.
Okay? So I bring forth to the public that there's a bill presently in the Florida Senate, Senate Bill 1524, that is now calling for the removal of a judicial immunity for the first time of any state in the nation, as a bill to remove that judicial immunity at long last, and as well put citizens on the review committees with the power to produce their own report, not only reportable to the Supreme Court justices, the Chief Justice, but also reportable to the legislature and the governor and several other bodies. You seem to have, when I talked to you before, seem to have little faith that this will happen. But what if it does have an effect, and what if people do rally behind such a bill and make it reality? Then what would you say?
I'd rather stick to my original position. I would rather stick to my original position that it's not going to happen until you get the Federalist Papers put in all the high schools all over the country. And the only way, the Bible says very plain, and the truth shall set you free. We'll be free of this tyranny if we get people educated properly. And when people understand separation of powers and checks and balances, and they realize how they've been hoodwinked by the whole legal profession, then and only then.
Then and only then can you go to the legislature and pass such bills
exactly.
as SB 1524.
That's exactly.
But I say let's not wait and get that 1524 passed now, and
you can try
and help the senator, the dear senator who's sponsoring it.
I'd love to see it passed, but I mean, I know how Washington works. I know how Tallahassee works, and I know how some of the other states' capitals work.
Somebody did the dog work on this bill. And I'm very curious to find out who.
Right.
Okay, for this dear black senator to have entered it into put it on the books.
I'd love to see it happen. I mean, there's not a doubt in my mind that if it ever happens, it'll be like a miracle. Because, like I said, the real situation today is I call it the dumbing down of America. I really do. I call it. There's books out there that'll tell you how to separation of powers, whatever about checks and balances, and they make sure that they don't get them out there. I call the education system the dumbing down of America. In other words, keep the people dumb and stupid, give them enough Pepsi-Cola, potato chips, and television, and these guys are laughing all the way to the bank. And I'd love to say, in every sense of the word, that we can do it. I wish I was more hopeful than now, but I see more and more bills being passed, and more superfluous subjects being taught in schools, and against the dumbing down of America.
Yeah, well, the dear senator that's sponsoring this bill, I doubt very much is a lawyer.
Right. These are excellent things, but the lawyers have so much power in Washington, and they have so much power in our state capital here in the state of Florida, that, like I say, I don't think there's a whole lot of hope until we get people that get those Federalist Papers put in there. We've just got a serious case in the state of Florida the Scott Rothstein case. I mean,
oh yeah, let's talk about Scott Rothstein.
Right. But in the state of Florida, there's a guy named Scott Rothstein, a lawyer who had a big law firm up in Fort Lauderdale.
And he was chairman of the Judicial Review Committee.
Oh, he's on the...
Chairman of the Distinguished Judicial Review Committee.
Right.
Only reserved for the lawyers of the greatest integrity.
Exactly.
So who is this Scott Rothstein?
And then he was a man that was collecting on these sexual cases and that sort of thing.
Or he was collecting on, basically what was happening was, so the public understands, that there'd be big settlements in some of these cases. In this case, the case was
sexual harassment and
other lawsuits.
Right.
It started like that, and Scott Rothstein had a hand in it. And what he did was he brought in investors to offer the winners of these lawsuits a lump sum ahead of time, and then these investors would get, let's say the settlement would be $50 million, but they would pay $10 million lump sum to the people now because the court only granted them like less than $1 million a year to collect. So therefore, they would accept a lump sum from these investors, and then the investors would take the rest.
Right.
But what happened was Scott Rothstein made up the cases. There were no cases. And the investors came in, greedy as they were, and they invested in these cases, and these cases were non-existent. So here you have a totally lying lawyer, yet he was on the highest tier of lawyerism.
He was on the Judicial Nomination Commission, and he's also on the Florida Bar Grievance Committee.
Yeah.
And you
the
got
chairman.
Exactly.
The chairman of the Grievance Committee. So what do you have to say about the law industry and the Bar Association now?
Well, it's the thing I've always said it's a total scam, and I've been saying this for the last 25 years, that the whole legal system's a scam. And I've been to the Florida Supreme Court on 4 different occasions, explaining the corruption. I mean, I see what happens is that, you know, you're automatically drowned up as a kook or a misfit or a wacko, and you know, you're telling the truth. You have the evidence with you. You're showing them the newspaper articles. You're showing things that are going on, and they just don't want to see it. They just bypass it. I mean, they have so much power. Okay. And again, like Board Action said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that's what they've got.
So this raw thing is now total scum, and I don't mind saying it because I know I'm not being libelous. Okay, no. Because we all know he is total scum.
Right. And
if he wants to sue me and say he's not total scum, I welcome him. But at any rate, there was a deposition that now he got 50 years in prison. Right. Okay. They take the worst of the worst and they set them as an example, and then they stop. Then the lawyers and the judges stop any other further prosecutions within the body of lawyers. They just pick one of the worst, and then they stop. Mm-hmm. That's how I see this. But he was now having a deposition being taken because the case has now pretty much ended. He got his 50 years, and now he's talking. Mm-hmm. Now he's talking so he can reduce his sentence.
Exactly.
Okay? So now he's spilling the beans on some of these people. And they took this deposition, and I read in the paper that suddenly some of the deposition is redacted. Mm-hmm. Names are redacted from a deposition. Sure. And I want to inform the public that when I legally hear that, I told Bob that one cannot redact from a deposition. It's illegal. If you want to do some redacting of that deposition, you take that deposition to the trial court phase, and you enter it as evidence, and that's where the redacting happens. It does not happen at the time of the deposition. So again, they're breaking laws. Now what he was naming were judges and other lawyers who were involved in this scheme. Judges. Yeah. And they redacted it to cover up, I believe, to cover up the names of these judges. Sure. He didn't redact it. The authorities that be redacted it. Because they're now part of a further conspiracy to cover up the judges he was naming. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, it's, you know, in this country, it's not what you know, it's who you know. If you know the right people, you can get away with it. And that's the sad part about it. And the thing that really bothers me is that one of the lawyers, her name is Lewis, she was bathing on the beach one day and somebody came and put a gun in her back and killed her. Okay? That's sad, but then she was a lawyer in that law firm. And it turned out that the ex-husband of the office manager, looks like she made the deal with her ex-husband to kill this woman lawyer. And on top of that, the sad thing again is that shortly after that, the office manager received a $450,000 home in Weston, paid for by the law firm, like a bonus. Now you pay your office manager to do something to get rid of one of the lawyers that's going to squeal on them, and that's a bill of fare. That's what's going on.
So they dumped her body in some canal. Is that what happened?
No, they just killed her on the beach, and that was it. And left. But the thing is,
I thought it was
on top of that, they had a brothel going. Yeah. They had a brothel going from that law firm.
At the law firm.
Yes, and they were given the key.
Prestigious law firms in
and they had
Miami, and they're total scum.
Right, and they're giving a couple of lawyers come in the office to, make some kind of a pleading or whatever.
No, what happened was, let me correct you, okay? What happened is some of the investors started getting wise to the scheme. And they would come in and confront Rothstein. I mean, one of the instances, and I'm sure there were other kinds of instances for which the brothel next door to this law firm, used by this law firm, was being used. Okay, so the investors would come and say, "Well, what's up? What's up with the money and the situation?" And Rothstein would respond by what? You don't trust me? You don't think that things are kosher and that things are going smoothly? Hey, look, you have a little stress. Go across the street and go get laid by these prostitutes, and you'll feel better in the morning. And that's basically what they did. What's ironic is that they were all greedy. The investors were greedy. Rothstein was greedy. It's just that Rothstein was greedier and more of a conniving fox than the other ones. And so he went out, at least for the time being, until he got exposed. And by the way, the reason why he did get exposed was because of the collapse of the financial system. Exactly. When the collapse of a financial system happens, then Ponzi schemes get exposed. It happened with Madoff, it happened with Tom Petters out in Minnesota, and it happened here with Rothstein. By the way, Rothstein knew Madoff.
Right.
Is that correct?
Exactly. The sad part about it, and these people have judicial immunity. I mean, up until this point, somebody would complain about Rothstein and the Florida bar would say,
that's not judicial.
But they have.
It's an immunity of a type.
They have immunity.
Yeah.
And he's on. And they say, well, no, he's reputable. He's on the Florida Bar Judicial Nominee. He's also on the Grievance Committee. Yeah. I mean, he
was granted immunities. Judges grant people involved in decision making, magistrates and people like that, with the same immunity. They'll grant a medical examiner, for instance, in a case, immunity. They'll just spread this immunity out. And where in the Federalist Papers does it say that these people are immune?
The whole thing is they don't follow the Federalist Papers. They don't have to because they got so much power. Again, like Lord Acton, the English nobleman, said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's a corrupt form of government, and somewhere along there's no checks and balances, there's no separation of powers, and your whole educational system is called the dumbing down of America. Keep the people dumb and stupid, give them enough Pepsi-Cola, potato chips, and television. And these people are laughing all the way to the bank. And the teachers don't know any better. They don't know that they should be teaching the Federalist Papers because that's, we're not following the Federalist Papers. That's why people don't go out and vote today. When you ask people in the street, why don't you go out and vote? And they said, no, it's like, I don't want to go out and vote. It's like replacing Al Capone with Bugs Malone. One set of crooks with another set of crooks. And once you get the stigma of this happening, this carries on.
It's the same hands aspect.
That's exactly the same hands control.
It's just the same hands control that the Federalist Papers give us a warning to.
Exactly.
Now we get to Newt Gingrich, and you met him, and perhaps he had a hand in his in his praise of the Federalist Papers.
Exactly.
And when he had that contract with America,
exactly.
way back when,
that was his opening speech.
His opening speech was
separation of powers and checks and balances. But the funniest thing happened.
Every congressman
must read the Federalist Papers.
Must read the Federalist Papers.
Right.
And now recently on the campaign trail, Newt is saying, what about judges?
Well, it's the same thing.
He's saying that it should, according to the Constitution, that a place where judges, where we can have, the legislature can have an effect upon judges, is to haul them into Congress and impeach them for bad behavior. Mm-hmm. Because a judge may only inhabit office during times of good behavior. Yeah. And when the behavior is bad, then they need to be impeached. And they haven't been impeached enough by Congress. One or two every 10 years,
just a token,
20 years.
Token thing.
You know?
The real thing that happens, like I say, when I got involved on a serious nature, as a fellow named Ross Perot came down to Miami and met us at the Knights of Columbus Hall, and he saw the material passing out, talking about separation of powers and checks and balances. And he invited, he said, I'll be having a convention in Dallas. I want you guys to be part of it. So we went to Dallas. He gave us a stand right in the middle of the auditorium, and it was right beside a fellow named Maury Taylor, who's an industrialist, and he wrote a book called First, Let's Kill All the Lawyers. Well, I thought that was kind of a little bit drastic, but I was giving everybody a little sticker they put on their lapel as soon as they came to my stand. I said, put on my sticker, and of course they put on their dress or put in their suit, restore the Constitution, don't vote for lawyers, and to get them out of the legislative and executive branch of government. So the funniest thing, I kept on passing those things out all over the auditorium. I think I must have passed out at least close to 10,000 stickers. And 10,000 stickers. Oh, there were people just jammed up and asking for half a dozen of those stickers. They could put them on there, and they go back to the meetings.
And Ross would come over and pat you on the back and say,
"Oh yeah, Mr. Perot was there."
My lapel.
Yeah, Mr. Perot came over, and a fellow by Newt Gingrich came over.
Yeah.
And Gingrich came over, and he said, "Listen," he said, "this is kind of dangerous that you're passing out these stickers. Don't go for lawyers because Washington's just loaded with lawyers." I said, "Mr. Gingrich, is that why they call it Washington, D.C., District of Criminals?" And he started laughing, and he said, "Listen," he said, I said, "Mr. Gingrich, you were a former history professor at the University of Georgia. You, above anyone else, should know the significance of the Federalist Papers because that was the original contract between the Founding Fathers and the citizens of the country. There was a group of people called the Anti-Federalists. And they were saying, let's not join the colonies together because the same as cream comes to the top of milk, scum will come to the top of the cesspool." So probably they were right in what their prediction was. But the bottom line is this. Mr. Gingrich came over and shook my hand. He said, if I ever get in a position of power, I'll do something to help you guys. So anyway, sure enough, there was the speech at the end of the conference was, he said, today in Washington we have the best congressman that money can buy. He said, a congressman comes to work in the morning, he gives a speech and does this and does that. And he said, and tells you what he's going to do and that. And 4 or 5 different people walk in his office throughout the day. He comes up with 180, his bill is 180 degrees the other direction. He doesn't go back, and he said he just, whatever paid him off the most money, that's the direction he votes in. He said, that's what we have all throughout Washington today. And he said, and that's what's happening in our Congress, and that's why people don't have any faith in the system. So believe it or not, on his opening speech in January 20th, 1995, and he was the contract of America, he was a Speaker of the House, and he said, as part of the contract of America, I want all of the incoming congressmen to read the Federalist Papers so you'll understand separation of powers, checks and balances, and find out what the Founding Fathers envisioned for the future of the country. That, to me, was worth that whole single trip to Dallas, just to realize that he realized that what everybody in the auditorium was talking about.
Perhaps the crux of the problem is that when you join the respective bars of the states, that you take an oath to the bar.
Exactly.
Okay, so now you have an oath to the bar.
Which is your premier.
Okay, and even judges probably wrongfully maintain their oath to the bar because they should be acting independent from the bar.
Exactly.
But and so that's even a problem within the judiciary. But then these lawyers go to the legislature and they are still lawyers, and they still got that oath to the bar. So what should be done about, you know, when a lawyer goes over to the legislature, he should
renounce his oath to the bar and say, no, I'm acting on behalf of the citizens of the state of Florida instead of the Florida bar, or people in the state of Florida call it the Florida barbarians, because they've done so much damage to innocent families. And
well, I don't know if they're that far to say that.
Oh, people are really, listen, the people in the state of Florida are pretty ticked off. If you ask 9 out of 10 people in the street, do you trust lawyers? They say, hell no. That's a common answer. They don't trust them because they've done so much damage in the state of Florida. And the Florida bar has got millions and millions and millions of dollars they have in their trust accounts. Instead of satisfying the publicans' claims or some of that, they just decide to keep it and they just ignore the public. And that's the sad part that's taking place today.
Okay. So they should disavow their oath to the bar and
make an oath to the public.
Emphasize always to honor the Constitution. And Bob Bertrand, I thank you very much for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you for coming over and thank you for the ability to speak up.
All righty. You take care.